we're going to speak about oil and Saudi money and about what's happening in Yemen. As we all know, there is a genocide happening in Yemen, and
we call it humanitarian aid with bombs.
Yeah, and so far, GOP lawmakers call for the war in Yemen thanks to money in politics, thanks to Saudi Arabia's oil money. And like I said, anybody can buy our elected officials. Anybody can buy our elections thanks to Citizens United and McCutcheon's decision. So, Paul, what's going on?
Yeah, so in 2017, in November of 2017, Republican Ed Royce made an impassioned plea in the House of Congress saying, part of the problem here is the leaders of the Houthi militia were indoctrinated by Qom in Iran as part of the Iranian attempt to construct a Hezbollah-like proxy in Yemen. So Li Fang of The Intercept accurately points out this inflammatory line had been scripted by a lobbyist for Saudi Arabia, like much of Royce's impassioned speech. And he goes through to identify that. Basically what they've been able to do is uncover through, I believe, Freedom of Information Act requests and legally required disclosures, that indeed he's making this argument using these talking points directly given to him by a Saudi lobbyist, someone who's lobbying on behalf of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates for favorable legislation from the United States and to continue the support of the war in Yemen. It's kind of incredible to see the access that foreign lobbyists are legally allowed to have in this arena. And the arguments that they're making are factually inaccurate. There really isn't any substantial connection between any terrorist groups allegedly in Iran. Hezbollah is the one that they're alleging in this case, operating in Sana'a, which is the capital, the Houthi capital of Yemen. The reality on the ground is it's a genocide that's taking place systematically by Saudi Arabia. So a list of the talking points that were given by the Saudi lobbyists include Iran has supported the Houthi movement since its inception. The Houthis are a minority in Yemen, and Iran uses them to exploit divisions within Yemen society. During the 90s, the leaders of the Houthi militia were indoctrinated into the Iranian city of Qom as part of the Iranian attempt to construct a Hezbollah-like proxy in Yemen. Literally the verbatim words that Ed Royce said in 2017. So he's a former congressperson. The Houthis' slogan is derived from Iran's own anti-U.S. slogans. Their slogan is "Death to America, death to Israel, damn the Jews." Again, not a factual statement, part of the propaganda that is supplied to United States representatives in Congress to argue for continued support of the genocide that's occurring in Yemen. Not factual information. This is information directly from Saudi lobbyists for the explicit purpose of continuing a genocide. That's what's up.
You know, there's all this talk about Russiagate and the concern of our elections being bought and how we need to fix our elections and make sure all our elected officials are beacons of responsibility and that they're not bought and sold. But oh, wait, no one's ever fixed that. Since 2016, it's been nothing but talk, no action, and this is the consequence of Citizens United and money in politics. This is the problem when you have a corrupt system and you put in legislation and laws that allow for legalized bribery. So in other words, what Saudi Arabia is doing isn't illegal. It's a war crime. It's disgusting. It's barbaric because then you have our elected officials turning a blind eye to a clear humanitarian disaster that's happening in Yemen. But, you know, where's the outrage? I mean, the American people, this is where your tax dollars are going, into that war, where there's an innocent family or community that's going to get bombed, and nothing. Silence. Daniel.
So, again, I always find it interesting on several fronts, going back to Venezuela, that we say Venezuela is committing all these humanitarian crises, except, you know, we don't care when Saudi Arabia does it. We don't care when any of our allies do it. But on top of all of this, this is a perfect example of everything going ass backwards. We in America who say we're for freedom are aiding in a genocide so that we can have an oil nation do well at the same time as we prepare to take over other countries under the guise of humanitarian reasons that also just happen to have a whole bunch of oil, or we don't want to use the same currency as we do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what do we get when we bomb Yemen? What do we get out of it? We get better alliances. We perhaps get a more secure strait that Iran will have a harder time in the future when we invade them, shutting off oil, going through that. this is
Weapons manufacturers make a lot of money.
We're just in this spot where it's like the system that we started in World War II of just being the arsenal of democracy. It's like it's just gotten so corrupt and decrepit in the way that it's moved over time that we're just like, I don't care if 100,000 people die, we'll make a nice amount of money. And we'll get to maintain our empire's dominance throughout the world.
I think this is a fascinating paragraph from this story. This, again, from Li Fang and the internet, from The Intercept. He notes, the Atlantic Council, which typically takes a relatively hawkish line on foreign policy, that's an understatement, I would say, noted in a 2017 report that more recent evidence from interviews with Houthis suggests that Iran does not enjoy command and control over them, citing several instances in which Houthi leaders ignored demands from Iran. The think tank added that while the Houthis generally admitted to some limited Iranian backing, alleged flights connecting the two countries were bringing weapons and advisors to the region, quote, never materialized as war broke out in earnest, putting the airport out of action. So it's odd that even the Atlantic Council is going, it doesn't seem like the Houthis really have any connection with Hezbollah to speak of.
Yeah, no, again, quoting the history of the world, I guess. They thought that one guy should have been the other guy, and that's the real difference in that the religion's being fought over. And again, that's all... It's crazy how much of the situation that they are dealing with and experiencing in the Middle East. It's just like, okay, let me take another step back. It's fascinating how in America and the West... we attack the Middle East for being barbaric and other words when we've been destroying their countries, redrawing their boundaries, overthrowing their governments, bombing their infrastructure, getting people to fight each other for over 100 years. Yet that's a completely irrelevant part of it that has nothing to do with the current sectarian violence that we started in a lot of ways, or we uncorked, or all these different things with the Sykes-Picot, everything of that nature. So this is a situation that we're in right now, which is not something new. It's not something that's, this just developed. This has been over 100 years in the making by the West's own hand. Now, I don't know what would happen if they didn't do all the stuff that was done in the Middle East. But what I do know, for all the people that say Islam is this barbaric threat, if it wasn't for the Middle East during the Dark Ages, there would have never been a Renaissance, because that information that was destroyed by Europe would have been lost if it had not been preserved in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. So you make a fascinating observation, actually, the sort of the crossover in the order of events as it pertains to both what's going on in Yemen and what's going on in Venezuela. This sort of comedy of telling people one truth, but obfuscating the fact that the United States had a giant hand in that. If you look at Venezuela, a lot of times they're saying, but their economics aren't good, their economic policies were bad, they're in dire straits. And it's like, you don't think that has anything to do with the fact that the United States had Saudi Arabia overproducing oil to drive the price down? You don't think that has anything to do with the fact that we've had Venezuela under sanctions for years? Like, you don't think we had our finger on the scale?
We do have our finger on the scale, but I think a lot of people, maybe a lot of voters, both Democrats, Republicans, Independents, don't really know the amount of influence the United States has. And look, we can be a bastion of liberty and democracy. We just got to reform the system, and it requires all of us to communicate with each other, talk to each other, and actually try and reform the political system that we have. Because what we have here only works for the top 1%. Now, are we all going to agree on everything? No, but I know for one thing, none of us want to see innocent people get hurt. None of us want to see people in Yemen get destroyed. None of us want to see a civil war happen in Venezuela. There's no such thing as a perfect scenario, but this requires us as citizens now to step up, because how we are viewed internationally is going to impact all of us as individual citizens. Daniel.
I want to make two small points to kind of buttress all of this super quick. What we have is a situation, I know we're working with the camera, that we have is that all of this could be fixed if we just did one thing. If we had a green economy, if we didn't rely on oil, all of these wars would have no meaning right now. They would look like what they are, and even the forces of capitalism that exist right now would be against the war, because there wouldn't be enough industries that are profiting off of it at once. So I want to give that point that if we just a Green New Deal, that's like none of this is needed. The market forces that apply to make this happen go away. And again, I'll go back to the point I always make, that this is what empires look when they're overextended at the late stages of their power. And what do we have right now at the late stages of their power is America overextending itself everywhere for no reason when it could fix itself and make itself much better. And again, I say it again and I'll say it again and again. China will take over if we do not control the descent of the empire. And if we do control the descent of the empire, well, like Paul says, we'll have to talk to people and not unilaterally tell them what to do. We'll have to actually discuss and make concessions. But we will still probably remain the biggest superpower. We just won't be the only superpower versus America collapsing and China taking over.
Yeah. I also want to give a shout out to Lainey Peterson, talking to each other. What a concept.
Yeah.
I know it's an odd
Diplomacy.
idea. It's diplomacy, but also internally, the American people, we've got to speak to each other because establishment media has done a fantastic job. And look, hear me out when I say this. Establishment media has done a fantastic job in dividing us. And it's all part of one big plan to really make sure that they not only they get their ratings up when they have two different points of view arguing, but also allows us to remain in our camps and so that nothing ever gets done. This is the problem with neoliberalism. This is the problem with corporatism running amok. This is an oligarchy system that we have. And we have to step up because if we continue turning a blind eye to this, it's only going to lead to a further disaster. And then don't be surprised if someday, I don't know when it's going to happen, but if we continue on this process, someday we might need help. And our international allies may not be so interested in helping us out.
Yeah, what happens when... Because they're happy to help us out now because we have so many things that we can lord over them because we control so much of their economy. But what happens when that's not the case?
Yeah, it's a situation.